Hello, everybody, and welcome to an Ikoria daily previews for draft video. This is day 3 of previews, so we've got a lot of cards to discuss. But before I dive in, I do want to remind you that if you enjoy the video, remember to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future uploads. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. It really is fun to interact with you and talk about all of the cards. But without further ado, let's dive on in. First up, we have Cub Warden. This card actually looks pretty good to me. The fact that you can start getting extra tokens means that you'll have more creatures that you can mutate onto. The 1/1s are actually really good targets for mutate because they have lifelink. So if you have a 1/1 lifelink and then you mutate it into a 5/4, it keeps lifelink and it really diversifies your threats. So this seems like the type of card that's like, oh, I'll mutate onto the Cub Warden over and over and over until I can get as many tokens as possible. But I actually think that it's probably best to mutate onto the Cub Warden once, or use the Cub Warden to mutate, and then mutate onto those 1/1 cats because you're getting the most power and toughness for your buck at that point. And this card actually strikes me as very, very powerful and definitely a high pick in draft. Next is Lavabring Venturer. This card has the dreaded protection mechanic. I think this card is going to be very good. I don't know enough about the removal in the set to know which converted mana cost most of the removal lies at, but you're going to, on a certain board state, it's going to be able to think, oh, my opponent's massive mutate creature has an even cost. I guess I'll choose even, and then your guy just blocks it for days, is invulnerable to a lot of removal. Generally, this type of card is going to be very, very powerful. It is a human, so you can't mutate onto it, but it is very, very good, and I think is a high pick as a result. I mean, it's got protection. Protection is inherently a very, very strong mechanic. Next is Pattaya Tiger, or Pattaya, or I think it's Pattaya. That's just kind of my initial thought. Or Pattaya. Regardless, it is a tiger that is flying, and it helps the humans. I think this card is great. 5-mana 3/4 flyer doesn't need a ton to become a great card. You just need to think about Shining Aerosaur from back in Ixalan block, or any number of the blue 5-mana 3/4 flyers. There's also just classic cases, like in Throne of Eldraine, there was a 5-mana 3/4 flyer that just didn't have any text except flying, and it was a solid card, and this card is significantly better in a human's deck. So I think Pattaya Tiger is going to be quite good. A pretty good payoff for your human deck, as not only does it help you push through damage on the ground on the turn it comes into play, which is really nice for an aggressive deck. You want your creatures to be contributing, especially your expensive creatures, but it then pushes through the final points of damage in the air. So I really like this card, and I think it's going to be a key part of the aggressive humans decks. Next is Sanctuary Lockdown. This is a really sweet human payoff. I don't know how many humans are going to be in the set, but if it's feasible to draft an all-humans deck, having an Anthem for your deck is really good. If this gives +1/+1 to all of your creatures, it's fantastic. And then the additional ability is actually quite relevant, because sometimes your small tokens decks, because humans looks like a tokens deck, can get stalled out by a bigger creature. So if they have a 4/4, you don't really want to be suiciding your 2/2s into it, even if it means pushing 4 damage. But if you say have 6 creatures and they have 3, or you have 5 creatures and they have 3, you can end step, pay 4 mana, tap 2 of their creatures, and then alpha strike them for 10. Because this card seems very good to me and a great payoff for being a humans deck. And it is probably good enough to be worth taking early and then drafting humans as a result, assuming there's enough humans in the set. Next is Swallow Whole. This is another great removal spell. It's going to really make it things hard on your opponent if they're trying to go all in on one creature, because you just kill the creature after it attacks you, and then you get your creature gets slightly bigger. I really like this card. You can even notably, you can even tap a creature that you just played. It doesn't care about summoning sickness. So if your board just doesn't happen to have a creature, you can go and you top deck a 2-drop, you can go 2-drop, Swallow Whole, tap the creature immediately, which is quite relevant. I think this card's going to be a high pick and quite good. I mean, 1 mana removal that buffs the creature seems quite strong to me, even though it is a bit situational. Next up is Capture Sphere. Instant speed, removal-ish. I think there's going to be more enchantment and artifact removal running around in this set than normal, because there is Wilt, which is a cycling version of Naturalize. So it's going to be in the main deck. So people are going to have ways to kill Capture Sphere, but it's going to be a nice temporary way to get rid of a creature. I just think it's going to be a little bit lower value than it was in its original set, which I believe was a Guilds of Ravnica. I think in that set it was just a removal spell pretty much, but in this set it's going to be a temporary removal spell a lot of the time against certain colors. So keep that in mind, especially against the green decks, but it'll still probably be a reasonably good card and a reasonably high pick for a lot of the blue decks, just because it's the best thing blue gets in terms of removal. Next is Sea Dasher Octopus. It's another what's it called? Scroll Thief type effect, similar to that Otter that we showed off in a couple videos ago, or maybe it was I think it was last video for the previews. But Sea Dasher Octopus, I think the fact that it doesn't have a mutate trigger, which is very interesting for a mutate card, but that means that it's better in, it's still good in decks that have mutate triggers, because it's a nice way to trigger your mutate triggers. So like, if a lot of the mutate cards say whenever this creature mutates, and Sea-Dasher Octopus is like whenever this creature deals combat damage, but it can still trigger all of your other cards that care about mutate. So if you have the card that gives flying, the card that bounces a creature, you can get a nice little bit of extra value from your Sea-Dasher Octopus. So I do think it's a great card. It's also a fine card to mutate onto. You can flash this in on their end step, then mutate something big onto it, hit them for a lot, draw a card. I think ways like this to get back your cards from your mutate creatures is going to be really nice, because then you don't go too far down on resources. And if your opponent doesn't deal with it, you can just win the game. So I think the Sea-Dasher Octopus is going to be a great card, similar to the Otter. On its baseline, it's an Otter that's slightly harder to cast, but the mutate makes it a nice little bit of extra upside. Next is Blitz of the Thunder Raptor. This is a great payoff for an instant or sorcery card, like Instants and Sorceries Matter deck. I haven't seen all of the support for it yet, but I am seeing more and more support for it. So I think that type of deck is going to be real. And those are some of my favorite decks to draft, because they're always really interesting to see how they end up working out, and they're always very fun. There's usually pretty cool win conditions for those types of decks, and Blitz of the Thunder Raptor is a great payoff, because nobody else is going to want this card, and so you can probably get it very late in the draft, and that's a very satisfying feeling, because it's going to be a premium card in your Instants and Sorceries deck, but nobody else can use it. So really a great card. I really like the design, and I think it'll be probably pretty good in the set, because I'm imagining there is support. Next is Cathartic Reunion. It's going to depend on how good the Instants and Sorceries deck is. There might be a minor care about discard theme. At least we saw that on the Mythic Rare. Maybe we'll see that on some other build around uncommons maybe, but overall it helps you get other Instants and Sorceries into your graveyard. Generally you're going to want to like save this till the late game so you can discard 2 lands and draw 3. It isn't an insanely powerful card, and if your opponent ever has counter magic, you get owned, so keep that in mind, but it can sometimes be playable, and if there is an Instants and Sorceries deck, this is going to be the type of card that digs you through your deck and starts putting Instants and Sorceries into your graveyard. Next is Forbidden Friendship. It's like the first half of that card's storyline, which is kind of cute. It's like the human finds the dinosaur, they're friends, and then he gives up everything to protect the dinosaur. Maybe there's a storyline piece in the middle that I haven't seen yet, but the two looked at each other and neither fled. "I see," the soldier murmured. "We're both just fighting for survival out here, aren't we?" It's like a real nice, touching moment there. But creating a 1/1 and creating 2 1/1s for 1 and a red is like a very classic thing. One of them is a dinosaur, so you can mutate onto it. One of them is a human, so you have payoffs for that. It's pretty a nice mix in red, because I think red, I think it's like white and black are the primary human colors, and then red might be the tertiary human color, and like red is one of the mutate colors. So this is kind of like a nice little mix for both of them. Making 2 1/1s for 2 mana is just generally going to be a solid deal. And so I think this card is going to be like pretty good as a result. Like, it's not horrible. It's never going to be like insane, but it's also never going to be like terrible. And also you can pull some cool shenanigans where you cast this and then immediately mutate a big creature onto the dinosaur, because it does have haste. Keep that in mind, so you can maybe hit them for a surprise, like 5 damage out of nowhere if you go like Forbidden Friendship, Cloud Thresher, which is like the 5/4 that has mutate for 4, and you can do that at like 6 mana. So that could be a pretty cool combo if you can save up those resources in your hand. But I think the card is going to be pretty solid. It's not going to be like overpoweringly good, but I think it's going to be pretty a card you're like fine playing in a lot of your decks, especially if you care about going wide. Next is Go for Blood. This is like, I think one of the, red is like one of the fight colors, but this is like just usually green is the color that just has fight spells, and now red just has a very good version of a fight spell. The creatures just fight each other. Doesn't get much simpler than that. And then you have cycling for 1. So this card is fantastic. I haven't seen all of the commons yet, but I have to imagine this is one of the top red commons, just because it's so flexible. If you can't kill the creature with a fight spell and you really need to dig for something, you can cycle it, or you can just wait on it. It triggers the cycling payoffs that care about that. I think Go for Blood is going to be fantastic, and it really is just a cool card design, because a lot of the time with a fight spell, if you don't have a big creature, it's a dead card because you can't fight the stuff anyway. But with Go for Blood, it really does mitigate some of that risk, especially because there's probably going to be some big creatures running around thanks to mutate and all these like counters and stuff like that. Next is Tentative Connection. And this is basically active treason. The thing with active treason is the cost generally is not as important as the overall like format support. So Tentative Connection, Active Treason is like a 3-mana version of this. Tentative Connection costs 4 and sometimes costs 1. But the thing is it's generally going to be a spell you cast on like the last turn of the game to enable a big attack. So it doesn't really matter because that extra mana, you're going to have it on the last turn of the game in most cases. And if you have a Menace creature, which I haven't seen how prevalent Menace is going to be, there are some cards that put Menace counters onto creatures, which makes Tentative Connection cost 1 mana. If there's more, like it costing 1 mana versus 4 doesn't generally matter as much as you would think. If you are a super aggressive deck, like hyper aggressive deck, and your opponent is kind of like a play one big creature defend you off type deck, this can be a great sideboard card. Sometimes your deck is aggressive enough to just want this card in the main deck, but those decks are a little bit more rare. The format may pan out to be such where people are just mutating over and over on the same creature. I'm still not sure about whether that's going to be the case, but if it is, Tentative Connection gets a little bit better because they'll have less creatures in play overall. And if there's a sacrifice theme, this is where the Tentative Connection really shines, and that's where it costing 1 mana really matters, because if your sacrifice effects cost 2 or 3 mana, Tentative Connection costing 1 mana means that you can steal a creature and sacrifice it for like 3 or 4 mana, even if your sacrifice outlays are very expensive. But overall, this is going to really be format dependent, and overall going to be very deck dependent, and whether or not the sacrifice deck exists is going to really matter. So yeah, it's a very hard card to rate, but I'd start off rating it relatively low. You don't need to prioritize it, because if there is a sacrifice deck, nobody else is going to want this card, and you'll be able to get it. Next up is Exuberant Wolf Bear. This is a really cool payoff for humans, even in a non-human color, and I like that they've kind of incentivized, like, humans have benefits and non-humans have benefits, which is kind of nice. This turns another creature into a 4/4 base, which means if it has counters, it'll keep those. If it has abilities like Menace, it'll keep those. Yeah, it's just going to be a pretty cool card overall. This reminds me of like a League of Legends character, like the Nunu and Willem character, which is kind of cool. It's kind of a fun little ref, or just like any duo where one person's riding a bear. Like in the Hobbit, I guess there's that one guy that can turn into a bear, Bjorn. But that's not really, people don't really ride him, so it's a little bit different than that. But I think this card's going to be pretty good. It just reminds me of a lot of the Gideons that turn creatures into like 4/4s that when Gideon attacks, things like that. Or what's the card from Theros Beyond Death? The one white Terranica. So yeah, Terranica was great, but that cost 3, but I mean, it's still going to be a very good card, and this is only an uncommon instead of a rare, so I think Exuberant Wolf Bear is great. Next is Thwart the Enemy. This card is generally going to be much worse than it looks. You're like, oh, but I'll just block all my opponent's stuff and then play this card. But a lot of the time, that situation doesn't come up, or you fall too far behind for it to come up. It can sometimes be playable in very fringe scenarios, but I really don't think you should be playing this card. Next is Frontland Felidar. On its own, it's a pretty good card. 4 mana for a 3/5 Vigilance with this ability is pretty good already, because you can attack and then activate the ability, which is really good. And it looks like you will be able to get some Vigilance counters probably, and there will be Vigilance creatures, and so I think Frontland Felidar is going to be a great card and really worth building around. And because keep in mind, you can attack and then use the tap ability. So you can have like 4 mana up, and then you attack with like 7, you attack for like 7 because you have like this creature and another Vigilance creature that's relatively big, and then you just tap 2 of their creatures and they just have no good blocks. Next up is Savai Thundermane. This card looks fantastic, really a great payoff for cycling. Also, red-white for a 3/2, great on its own. The cycling ability, fantastic. You can basically like shoot down smaller threats, and you gain some life in the process. I really like Savai Thundermane, and I'm super excited to play around it. And I think it's worth taking early because you are going to be able to get cycling cards, I think. And with a card as powerful as Savai Thundermane, you can sometimes even consider playing off-color cyclers that just have like cycling 1 generic mana in their cost, potentially, because then you just have 3 mana, deal 2, gain 2, which is a solid card a lot of the time. Next is Cunning Nightbonder. Not sure how good this card is. I mean, it's a 2 mana 2/2 with flash, with minor upside. If there's a lot of flash spells and a lot of counter spells, maybe it gets better, but having a hard time imagining this card being like insane. It's just a 2 mana 2/2. The abilities are relatively unimportant, and it's just going to be like a flexible 2-drop that you can take early and play in a lot of your decks. But I mean, you're not going to take it early because it's a 2 mana 2/2. But yeah, not really understanding what this card is doing. For limited, it's just going to be a mediocre card, I think. Next is Lurrus of the Dream Den. This is one of those companions that I think you don't want to build around. You just kind of want to put it in your deck, because not having cards that cost more than like 2 is going to be a huge like downside. I guess you can have spells that cost more than 2, but you really don't want to be Like, this is more of, I think, maybe a constructed thing than a limited thing, but you don't really want to be playing cards that cost, like, you want to have some expensive cards to play, even in your aggressive decks, because only 2-drops is not only pretty much impossible to get in limited, it's also just not very powerful. So this card will be good in the main deck, though. 3-mana, 3/2 lifelink that you can cast, like, a 2-drop every turn from your graveyard is going to be great. So I think it's an early pick, but you don't want to build around the companion aspect of it. Finally, we have Obosh the Prey Piercer. This is another one. I think having only odd converted mana costs in your deck is going to be really too difficult to facilitate, especially because you want to have 2-drops in your limited decks. So I think this card is another one that you'll just want to, you can just play it on its own. It's a flexible card. You can play it in a black deck or a red deck or a red-black deck. And then you can also just have it does count itself, so it'll deal 6 damage, so it's like a 5-mana 6/5, with that randomly buffs other cards that you have, and it's very flexible. So I think it'll still be a good card to play, but it's not necessarily going to be a, like, stellar, oh, I have to build around it. A lot of the companions are like that for limited, where you don't really want to build around them in your limited decks, but they're worth playing in the main deck still. That is going to do it for today's dose of daily previews. I do hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought of my takes on the cards in the comment section down below. Remember to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you in the next video.